This conference will now be recorded.
So, hello everyone. I hope I'm audible to all. Can you all hear me?
Yes, dear.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Hope everyone is keeping safe. I welcome you all from RAISE Academy, and I'm Dr. Gitika Arora, one of the mentors in this academy. Today, we'll be discussing about two very important guidelines. One is the NICE guideline for preterm labor, and the other one is Green Top guideline for care of women, who is presenting with preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes from 24 weeks. So I have marked the questions which they usually ask in exam, the single best answers. So you can kindly note them because many questions do come from these two guidelines. So hope you enjoy the session. So I'm going to start now. So to start with, what is preterm labor? So any delivery which is occurring before 37 completed weeks of gestation, that is 259 days, is known as preterm labor, and it is a major cause of neonatal mortality and morbidity. In UK, around 8% of the live born babies, they are preterm. And most of these babies, they are born after 28 weeks. The number of babies which are born before 28 weeks, they account for 0.6% of all the preterm babies. Now let's see what is preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. So it is the rupture of membranes before 37 weeks, before the onset of labor. And this condition, it complicates 3% of all the pregnancies. And it is associated with 30 to 40% of preterm birth. Why does preterm labor occurs? So there are many theories behind it, like uterine overdistension, ischemia, infections, cervical diseases, abnormal allograft reaction, or allergic phenomena, or any endocrine disorders. There are certain risk factors which should be asked from the mother, and this is important from part 3 exam point of view. So whenever we are taking history from a female who has reported to us with suspected preterm labor, we should ask from her history of previous preterm delivery, because the studies do show that with each preterm delivery, the risk of having a preterm birth in subsequent pregnancy, it increases. So with one preterm delivery, it is 16 to 19%. With previous two preterm deliveries, it becomes 32 to 41%. And with previous three preterm deliveries, it becomes 67%. Any previous history of preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, mid-trimester pregnancy loss, any congenital uterine anomalies, for example, biconvate uterus, uterus diadelphys, septate uterus, can lead to preterm deliveries. Multiple pregnancies, we all know that the twins, they do come early, and the triplets, they come around 70% of the triplets, they are born at 35 weeks of gestation. So with increasing number of the babies, the preterm delivery increases. Vaginal bleeding, short cervix, previous multiple LITS procedure on the cervix, cone biopsy, all this leads to preterm labor. Why are we so much worried about preterm babies? The preterm babies do have can have certain specific complications related to preterm birth. So these can be respiratory distress syndrome, necrotizing enterocolitis, retinopathy of prematurity, sepsis, intraventricular hemorrhage, periventricular leukomalacia, which is one of which accounts for 2 to 3%, affects 2 to 3% of the infants who are born less than 1500 grams. So this I have taken from TOG regarding magnesium sulfate uses in preterm deliveries. So this number is also important. Long-term cognitive and sensory impairment, all these conditions can be related to preterm birth. The two major determinants for the mortality and morbidity of babies born to preterm are the gestation at delivery and the birth weight. So this is another question which they can ask. So severe intraventricular hemorrhage, which is grade 3 and grade 4, which is one of the complications which can occur in preterm babies. It is reliably detected by ultrasound, whereas periventricular leukomalacia is detected by MRI. So this is one of the single best answers. There are certain terminologies which you should be aware of when we are talking about preterm labor. One is suspected preterm labor, one is diagnosed preterm labor, and the third one is established preterm labor. So what is suspected preterm labor? A woman is said to be in suspected preterm labor if she reports to us with symptoms of preterm labor and she has a clinical assessment done, that is a speculum examination or a digital vaginal examination that confirms the possibility of preterm labor but rules out established labor. A woman with suspected preterm labor, when we are doing a diagnostic test on her and the diagnostic test comes out to be positive, then the female is in diagnosed preterm labor. So I'll be talking about the diagnostic tests which we are doing in females with suspected preterm labor to diagnose preterm labor. The third one is the established preterm labor. So a woman is in established preterm labor if she has progressive cervical dilatation from 4 centimeters with regular uterine contractions. So all these three terms, they are very important. So any female who is coming to us with pain abdomen and we are doing a per speculum per vaginal examination, we find that she may be in preterm labor. So then we call it as suspected preterm labor. When we are doing a test on her, that is some diagnostic test, that is transvaginal sonography or fetal fibronectin, which I'll be talking about. And if those tests, they come out to be positive, then she is in diagnosed preterm labor. And of any cervical dilatation, if the cervical dilatation, it occurs further from 4 centimeters, then the female becomes an established preterm labor. So what is the prophylaxis against preterm labor? So this is, I know, a very confusing chart. I have taken it from NICE. So firstly, we will take the history. Okay, if the female has a preterm labor before 34 weeks or any mid-trimester loss after 16 weeks, then we will offer this female cervical surveillance, serial cervical surveillance, that is transvaginal sonography. And this is done between 16 and 24 weeks. So by transvaginal sonography, we will see the length of the cervix. If the length of the cervix is 25 millimeter or less than 25 millimeter, and then in that case, we will offer her sarclage or progesterone. So this is the only condition where we are offering sarclage or progesterone. That is, if she has a history of preterm birth before 34 weeks or any mid-trimester loss after 16 weeks. In that case, we will offer her serial cervical surveillance with transvaginal sonography. And if the cervical length comes out to be 25 millimeter or less than 25 millimeter, we will offer her sarclage or progesterone. However, if the cervical length is more than 25 millimeter and she has a history of previous preterm birth or mid-trimester loss, in that case, we will consider giving her vaginal progesterones. The second scenario is when the female has previous history of cervical trauma. This cervical trauma can be in the form of large loop excision of transformation zone or LEEP procedure or cone biopsy, or any previous history of preterm, pre-labor rupture of membranes. In this case, again, we will offer her serial cervical surveillance with transvaginal sonography between 16 and 24 weeks. We will look for the length of the cervical length in that case. If the cervical length is 25 millimeter or less than 25 millimeter, in this case, we will consider doing a sarclage procedure for her. Okay, so we are not giving her progesterones here if there is previous history of any cervical trauma or preterm prom. So we are just considering giving her sarclage. However, if the cervical length is more than 25 millimeter, in that case, we will just reassure her and that her cervical length is fine and she is at a lower risk of having a preterm labor. So this chart is very important. Many questions do come from this chart. And whenever we are offering her vaginal progesterone, it is important that we start the vaginal progesterone between 16 and 24 weeks. And we continue this vaginal progesterone until at least 34 weeks. So it is around for 10 to 18 weeks, we are giving this vaginal progesterones to her. So now talking about preterm labor as such. So in this slide, in the previous slide, we studied about prophylaxis of preterm labor. What if the mother comes with pain, abdomen, and symptoms of preterm labor? So the first thing we have to do there is to take a clinical history from the patient about her pains and about whether she is feeling fetal movements and any previous history of preterm labor and any cervical procedure she had. Then we will take her vital signs and do a per abdomen and a per speculum followed by digital vaginal examination for her. If on per speculum examination we are not able to make out the cervical dilatation, then we will offer her digital vaginal examination. So by taking the history and by examination, we suspect now that the patient is in preterm labor. Now the further management will depend upon the period of gestation. If the gestation is 29 plus 6 weeks or less than that, then we have to treat this patient as preterm labor. We need not do any diagnostic test on her. However, if the gestation is 30 weeks or more than 30 weeks, then we will consider doing a transvaginal sonography for this female. So in transvaginal sonography, we will look for the cervical length. What is the cervical length? So if the cervical length is more than 15 millimeter, then we will just reassure her. However, if the cervical length is less than or equal to 15 millimeter, then she is in diagnosed preterm labor. So this is meant by diagnosed preterm labor. The patient has come with suspected preterm labor. You have done a diagnostic test on her and the cervical length has come out to be 15 millimeter or less than 15 millimeter. In that case, you diagnose it as a preterm labor. However, if the gestation is 29 plus 6 weeks or less than 29 plus 6 weeks, then you have to treat her as a preterm labor because the gestation is too much less. You have to treat her as a preterm labor. And in 30 weeks or more than 30 weeks, we will do diagnostic test. Hope this is clear up till now. If transvaginal sonography is not acceptable to the patient or it is not available, then we have another test which we can do, and that is fetal fibronectin test. This will tell us the likelihood of birth within the next 48 hours. So the fetal fibronectin can be 50 nanogram per milliliter or less, or it can be more than 50 nanogram per milliliter. So if it is more than 50 nanogram per milliliter, then it is a diagnosed preterm labor and we will offer her treatment. So this is the second diagnostic test which we are doing. However, if the fetal fibronectin is 50 nanogram per milliliter or less, then we will think about alternative diagnosis. This pain can be because of some other conditions. She can have urinary tract infections or any local infections. We will discuss with the patient the benefits and risk of going home compared with continued monitoring and treatment in hospital. We will advise her that if she does decide to go home, she should return if symptoms suggestive of preterm labor, they persist or they reoccur. So any value less than or equal to 50 nanogram per ml, you rule out preterm labor, and any value more than 50 nanogram per ml, you diagnose preterm labor. What is fetal fibronectin? So fetal fibronectin, it is a glycoprotein which is present in high concentration in the cervicovaginal secretions before fusion of membranes, which normally occur at around 21 weeks. So normally at 21 weeks, the chorionic membrane, it fuses with the decidua. So normally this fetal fibronectin is present in the cervicovaginal secretions before this gestation. Disruption of choriodecidual interface after 21 weeks. So after 21 weeks, it should not be present because the chorion, it fuses with the decidua. So if it is present, either because of inflammation or mechanical trauma, this will result in the secretion of fetal fibronectin into the cervix and vagina. So based on this principle, the swabs are taken from the posterior fornix or ectocervix, which detect fetal fibronectin. And this can predict preterm birth between 22 and 34 weeks of gestation. There are certain contraindications where fetal fibronectin should not be used. So what are those contraindications? Any gestational age less than 22 weeks or more than 34 weeks. So normally after 34 weeks, again, the fetal fibronectin, it starts to appear in the cervicovaginal secretion. And as already told that before 21 weeks, it is already present. So it carries no value before 22 weeks or after 34 weeks. If there is preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, if there is multiple pregnancy, if the cervix is more than 3 centimeters dilated, if there is active vaginal bleeding, vaginal examination or intercourse in previous 24 hours, or if we are using any lubricant jellies. So in all these cases, doing fetal fibronectin is contraindicated. This is from Strategy. What is the role of rescue cervical sarclage? So we can consider doing rescue cervical sarclage for women between 16 and 27 plus 6 weeks of pregnancy with dilated cervix and exposed unruptured fetal membranes. We should not offer rescue cervical sarclage to women with signs of infection, with active vaginal bleeding or uterine contraction. So these are the contraindications to rescue cervical sarclage. Now coming to the treatment of preterm labor. So the first drugs which we are giving is the tocolytic. We all know that 2 types of tocolytic are being used in UK. That is the calcium channel blocker, which is nifedipine, and oxytocin antagonist, which is atosiban. However, only oxytocin antagonist is licensed for use in UK. But since it is a very costly drug, so the first line agent which is used is nifedipine. Beta agonists are not used because of its side effects. So nifedipine is the first line drug, and if there is any contraindication to nifedipine, then we are going for atosiban. So now this is very important, when to consider giving tocolytic and when to offer tocolytic. So normally we are considering tocolytic between 24 weeks and 25 plus 6 weeks. However, from 26 weeks to 33 plus 6 weeks, we are offering nifedipine. For atosiban, the recommended regimen is a 3-step procedure. Initially, we are giving a bolus over 1 minute, and then we are giving infusion. The first infusion is at the rate of 18 milligram per hour for 3 hours, and then it is 6 milligram per hour for up to 45 hours. and it is maximum dose is 330 milligram. This again is from Strategy. You need not remember, just remember that this is the only drug which is used. The first line drug which is used is nifedipine, and beta agonists, they are not used. And with regards to preterm prom, the use of tocolytic is not recommended. So in preterm prom, we are not using tocolytics. What is the role of antenatal corticosteroids? So we all know that we are using two types of corticosteroids. One is the betamethasone. The dosage is 12 milligram, two doses, 24 hours apart. And the other one is dexamethasone, which is 6 milligram, which is given 4 doses intramuscularly at an interval of 12 hours. Each dose 12 hours apart. So 4 doses are given. So the studies show that giving antenatal corticosteroid, it decreases the risk of RDS and IVH. So respiratory distress syndrome and intraventricular hemorrhage is prevented with these antenatal corticosteroids. However, there is no difference between steroid and control group with regards to necrotizing enterocolitis, neonatal sepsis, Apgar score less than 7 at 5 minutes, and perinatal mortality. So earlier they were saying that these steroids, they also prevent against necrotizing enterocolitis. But now the latest studies have shown that these steroids, they just prevent against two conditions, that is RDS and the intraventricular hemorrhage. The risk of chorioamnionitis and neonatal sepsis with maternal steroid use is not increased. Now, when to offer and when to consider giving these steroids? Women who have preterm labor or preterm labor rupture of membranes from 24 weeks should be offered steroid between 24 and 25 plus 6 weeks, between 26 and 33 plus 6 weeks, and we can consider giving steroids between 34 weeks and 35 plus 6 weeks. Repeat courses of steroid should not be routinely offered, but that the interval since the last course, the gestational age, and likelihood of birth in the next 48 hours should be taken into account. So normally we are not giving repeat courses of corticosteroids. Now, what is the role of magnesium sulfate for neuroprotection of the baby? So the studies have shown that this magnesium sulfate, it reduces cerebral palsy and motor dysfunction in the offspring. So we are giving this magnesium sulfate when the woman has established preterm labor. That means that the female is about to deliver in next 24 hours. She has progressed beyond 4 centimeters, and we have the surety that the woman will deliver in the next 24 hours. In that case, we are offering her intravenous magnesium sulfate. So normally this is offered between 24 weeks and 29 plus 6 weeks. And we are considering it between 30 weeks and 33 plus 6 weeks. And it is preventing against cerebral palsy and motor dysfunction. And the greatest benefit is before 30 weeks of gestation. Now, how we are giving this magnesium sulfate? So we are giving it as at a dosage of 4 gram intravenous bolus of magnesium sulfate over 15 minutes, which is followed by intravenous infusion of 1 gram per hour until birth or for 24 hours, whichever is sooner. So this is very important. Okay, this is the same regimen which we are following in eclampsia. And as in that case, whenever we are giving magnesium sulfate, we have to monitor the patient very meticulously. We have to, every 4 hourly, we have to record her blood pressure, her pulse rate, her respiratory rate, her deep tendon reflexes, and urine output. And we should always have the antidote with us. That is 10% of calcium gluconate, which is given over 10 minutes. And this is to be given if we are suspecting any signs of toxicity. Okay, so we should have this antidote with us, 10 ml of 10% calcium gluconate, which is given over 10 minutes. We should, when we are giving magnesium sulfate, and the women is also receiving nifedipine, there are chances that maternal hypotension can occur. So we should avoid giving magnesium sulfate concurrently with nifedipine as a tocolytic agent. So this is again very important. Now, how do we diagnose preterm PROM? If the woman comes to us with a history of preterm PROM, we will offer her sterile speculum examination. If the leak is present, then no further test is done and we will treat her as preterm PROM. However, if the leak is not present, we will do further testing. Now, what are these further tests? These further tests, they look for certain biomarkers in the vaginal fluid. What are the biomarkers they are looking for? They are looking for insulin-like growth factor binding protein 1 or placental alpha microglobulin 1. So we have kits in the market which detect these markers in the vaginal fluid. And if the leak is not present, we can do these tests and we can diagnose preterm PROM. Testing for nitrazine is not recommended, and if the woman is in established labor with preterm PROM, then no further tests have to be done. And the role of ultrasound in assessing the amniotic fluid is unclear. So normally we are making a diagnosis on history, on doing speculum examination. If on speculum examination the liquor is present, no further tests need to be done. However, if the liquor is not present, in that case, further tests have to be done, and these are the two tests. So they can give you the scenario like this, and they can ask you, if the leaking is not present on speculum examination, you have to go for insulin-like growth factor and placental alpha microglobulin test. Okay, so what is required antenatally to identify the infection? So how to identify infection? If the female has come with preterm PROM and we have put her on conservative management, the main thing which is in our mind is to see for chorioamnionitis, that the mother and the baby, they are not developing infection. So how do we identify that infection? So a combination of clinical assessment, maternal blood test, that is C-reactive protein, and WBC count, and fetal heart rate is used to diagnose chorioamnionitis. So a combination of these parameters is used, and none of these parameters should be used in isolation. Okay, like it shouldn't be like this, like we are just making the diagnosis of chorioamnionitis on the clinical assessment only, or we are just taking into consideration the blood test. The whole clinical picture along with the blood test and the fetal heart rate should be taken into account. The mother should be advised of and observed for the symptoms of clinical chorioamnionitis, that is lower abdominal pain, abnormal vaginal discharge, fever, malaise, and reduced fetal movement. So these are some of the symptoms of chorioamnionitis. While we are doing this test, it is important that we keep in mind that if we are giving steroids, the WBC count, it does rises 24 hours following administration of the steroids, and it should return to baseline 3 days following administration. So the WBC count, it normally increases after giving steroids, and it returns to baseline within 3 days. So when we are doing WBC count test, the blood test, we should take this thing into consideration, that when we give her the steroid dose. C-reactive protein has a sensitivity of 68.7% and specificity of 77.1% in diagnosing histological chorioamnionitis. So again, this NICE guideline recommends, it's the same thing, that a combination of clinical assessment, that is pulse, blood pressure, temperature, symptoms, maternal blood test, that is C-reactive protein, WBC count, and the fetal heart rate should be employed to diagnose clinical infection. If the results of clinical assessment or any of the tests are not consistent with each other, it is recommended that the woman should continue to be observed and consideration should be given to repeat testing. Now, how should the woman be cared? So initial for few days, we have to admit the patient. Okay, and we have to look for her vital signs, and that is her pulse, BP, respiratory rate, temperature, and this should be recorded in modified early obstetric warning charts. And they should also be observed for clinical symptoms and signs of infection. Once the patient is stable, the patient can be discharged and she can have outpatient management, depending upon how far she is staying from the hospital and individualizing the case. So if we are considering doing an outpatient management, then the patient needs to be called once or twice each week. And if the female has any concern, she should attend the hospital immediately. So when she is coming to the hospital, we are doing these tests on her. That is, we are taking her history. We are asking for the symptoms of chorioamnionitis. We are doing blood tests on her. We are doing fetal heart rate monitoring. So these patients can be followed. Once she is stable, she can be followed on outpatient basis. However, initial treatment should be given on inpatient basis. Now talking about preterm prom, what antibiotics are, which is the antibiotic of choice. So here we are giving erythromycin, which is 250 milligram 4 times a day for 10 days or until the female is in established labor, whichever is sooner. So this is the antibiotic of choice. If the female is cannot tolerate or she is sensitive to erythromycin, in that case we can give penicillin. Co-amoxiclav should be avoided as it is associated with increased risk of neonatal necrotizing enterocolitis, and antibiotics should not be given unless the diagnosis of preterm prom is confirmed. Why we are giving these antibiotics? The studies have shown that there is significant reduction in the number of babies born within 48 hours. Neonatal infection, use of surfactant, oxygen therapy, abnormal cerebral ultrasound prior to discharge from the hospital was also reduced. However, there was no significant reduction in perinatal mortality or health of the child at 7 years of age. So this is important. Yeah, I'll be talking about GBS here. I'll be talking just a second. So should neonatologists be involved in the female's care? Yes, it's very important that the neonatologist should be informed when the diagnosis of preterm prom is confirmed and delivery is anticipated. It is important to ensure that neonatal unit has appropriate staff and facilities to care for neonate should delivery occur. Women with preterm labor or preterm prom should have the opportunity to meet the neonatologist antenatally to discuss their baby's condition. In preterm prom, amnio infusion is not recommended as a part of routine clinical practice. Women with preterm prom and their partners should be offered additional emotional support during pregnancy and postnatally. Now talking about birth, this is again a very important SPA. So if the woman whose pregnancy is complicated by preterm prom after 24 weeks of gestation and who has no contraindication to continue the pregnancy should be offered expectant management until 37 weeks of gestation. So we are offering her conservative management till 37 weeks. And in the subsequent pregnancy following preterm prom, the woman should be cared for by an obstetrician with an interest in preterm birth. Now, as asked, like what is the management of preterm labor to reduce the risk of early onset GBS disease in the newborn? So if the woman has preterm rupture of membranes, normally we are not doing bacteriological testing for GBS carriage for women with preterm labor. However, once the labor is confirmed or induced, irrespective of GBS status, then IAP should be given. That is, intrapartum antibiotic prophylaxis with penicillin should be given if the labor is confirmed or induced before 37 weeks. For those with evidence of colonization in current pregnancy or in previous pregnancy, the perinatal risk associated with preterm delivery at less than 34 weeks of gestation are likely to outweigh the risk of perinatal infection. So if by chance we know that the female has GBS carriage stage, or her previous pregnancy was complicated by GBS and now she has preterm prom, then in that case, we have to induce the labor at 34 weeks. Okay. So with GBS carrier state, the labor is to be induced at 34 weeks. However, if the GBS carrier state is not known, then the conservative management can be continued up to 37 weeks. I hope this is clear. So what is the mode of delivery? When we are talking about the preterm or pre-prom, what is the mode of delivery? So the journal consensus is like, okay, so it's not clear. So Shohista, it's like if we know that the patient has GBS carrier state, if for any other reason we did her swabs or on midstream urine she had GBS bacteriuria, and we know that she is a GBS carrier, or her previous baby was complicated by early onset GBS, or she had GBS carrier state in her previous pregnancy, and she has preterm premature rupture of membrane, then the labor should be induced at 34 weeks. However, if we do not know about GBS carrier state and the pregnancy is low risk, in that case the pregnancy can be continued up to 37 weeks. So the conservative management has to be done up till 37 weeks in all the pregnancies, except the pregnancies where the GBS carrier state is known. Okay, it's clear now? Okay. So apart from erythromycin, she already received, and at 34 weeks, if we are inducing her, we have to give her penicillin. We have to give her intrapartum prophylaxis. So talking about the mode of delivery, the journal consensus would favor vaginal delivery at less than 26 weeks. Between 26 weeks and 37 weeks of gestation, decision regarding mode of delivery for cephalic presentation should take into account the same obstetric factors that would guide management at term. So it is just as we are deciding at term what mode of delivery to be done, in the similar way it is decided. However, if it is a breech presentation, the NICE says consider doing a cesarean section for women presenting in suspected. What about previous GBS for? Okay, let me finish. I'll just take out the questions after that. So so we will consider doing a cesarean section for women presenting in suspected, diagnosed, or established preterm labor between 26 and 36 plus 6 weeks of pregnancy with breech presentation. Cesarean section in its extremely prematurity at less than 28 weeks of gestation is more likely to be classical cesarean section. So this should be told to the mother in the absence of well-formed lower segment. So if we are doing cesarean section before 28 weeks, it is more likely to be a classical cesarean section, and the mother should be informed about that. And implication for the mode of delivery in future pregnancy and risk of adherent placenta should be told to her. While we are going for a normal vaginal delivery, do not use fetal scalp electrode for fetal heart rate monitoring if the woman is less than 34 weeks, and do not carry out fetal blood sampling. Okay. Regarding cord clamping for preterm babies, if a preterm baby needs to be moved away from the mother, the baby requires resuscitation, or there is any maternal compromise, there is any significant maternal bleeding, in that case, we will consider milking the cord and clamp it as soon as possible. However, if the condition of both the mother and the baby, they are fine, in that case, we will wait at least 30 seconds, but not longer than 3 minutes. And while we are waiting for this period, we will position the baby at or below the level of the placenta before clamping the cord. I have made few slides for intrauterine transfer also, because it is one of the important stations in part 3 and part 2 also you get the questions. So sometimes the baby with the mother needs to be transferred to another maternity unit. So what are the indications? It can be clinical or operational. So clinical, when the mother or the baby require enhanced care, and operational if the NICU is closed because of staffing or overloading, if there is a neonatal request, we don't have any staff, or there is the cots are full, or the delivery suite capacity is full, there is a staffing problem there. There are contraindications. Not all the patients can be considered for intrauterine transfer. If there is fetal or maternal compromise requiring immediate delivery, in that case, the transfer cannot be done. If there is significant risk of delivery during intrauterine transfer, if there is unstable maternal or fetal condition that could deteriorate during transfer, if the mother refuses transfer, there is negative fetal fibronectin test, or there is intrapartum hemorrhage. So in all these cases, the transfer should not be done. So once we have ruled out all the contraindications, then our next step will be to inform our consultant and the neonatologist. Mother consent is taken. We will contact the neonatologist, obstetric registrar, and labor ward coordinator of the appropriate receiving unit. Once they have accepted the transfer, we will inform our midwife. SBAR handover form will be filled. Photocopy all the obstetric notes. Original notes should not be given. Okay, so this is important. Then prior to transfer, and electronic fetal monitoring should be performed. IV access should be maintained. Again, we should consider doing fetal fibronectin. Cervical assessment should be done digitally unless it is contraindicated. And we should consider use of tocolytic. Magnesium sulfate should not be started because it requires intensive monitoring. Okay, but you can give the first dose of steroid. You can consider giving the tocolysis. One appropriately trained midwife who is competent in newborn resuscitation to provide immediate care to the baby should be accompanying the patient. In utero transfer bag should be taken while the patient is being transferred, and this should include symptometrin and syntocinon. Okay, so the in utero transfer bag should be taken by the midwife who is accompanying the patient. During in utero transfer, the escorting midwife has the responsibility to continually assess the patient clinical condition. If in preterm, labor observation should also be monitored, including palpation of contractions and monitoring the vaginal loss. There is no indication for fetal heart rate auscultation during the transfer. All care provided during transfer should be documented clearly within the notes. If at any time during transfer, the midwife feels that the patient's situation is changing or deteriorating, then in that case, and the delivery is imminent, the transfer should be diverted to the nearest hospital with maternity unit. Okay, so this is again a very important scenario, and it comes as part 3 station. So electronic fetal monitoring is to be done prior to transfer. IV access should be there. Cervical assessment should be done. Fetal fibronectin should be tested. Tocolysis and steroid should be given. However, magnesium sulfate should not be started. And one trained midwife should be accompanying the patient. In utero transfer bag should be taken, which should have symptometrin, syntocinon. During in utero transfer, it is the escorting midwife should assess the patient condition, palpate for the contractions, look for any vaginal loss. However, fetal heart rate auscultation, they are saying there is no indication for it. And all the management which was given during transfer should be clearly documented. This is one of the charts I have taken. They, in part 2, they are very fond of percentages. So this I have taken from the BMJ journals, which is perinatal management of extreme preterm birth before 27 weeks of gestation, a framework for practice. So here they are saying at 22, extreme preterm means any birth which is occurring before 28 weeks. So at 22 weeks, the patient, the fetus survival rate is 30%. At 23 weeks, it is 40%. At 24 weeks, it is 60%. 25 weeks, 70%. 26 weeks, 80%. Okay, so these percentages, they are important. And severe disability, that is cerebral palsy or any other deformities, severe deformities, they affect at 22 weeks, 1 out of 3 babies will have. At 23 weeks, 1 out of 4 babies will have, that is 25%. And at 24 weeks, 25, 26, around 14% of the babies, they will have severe disability. So these are some of the percentages they are very fond of, and they generally ask you in exam. So any doubts now? I have done with my presentation, and a brief about like we are coming up with a marathon course. It will be a 10 days course starting from 20th of June. And it will be, the classes will be daily for 3 to 4 hours. And I and Dr. Rashmi will be taking the classes alternatively. Any doubts you have, you can ask. I hope the session was helpful.
Sorry, ma'am, I have just joined the late actually.
Yeah.
Can you please tell me the role of atosiban and this thing, because this question happens many time confusion to us in a while in utero transfer. What tocolysis need to be given? What is the role of atosiban?
Nifedipine is the drug of choice. Nifedipine is the drug of choice. Atosiban is given only when nifedipine and conditions when nifedipine is contraindicated. For example, any heart-related issues are there or like that. Okay. Otherwise,
So during in utero transfer, ma'am, can we give nifedipine?
Yeah, we can give.
Yes.
But magnesium
Okay,
sulfate should not be given. Magnesium sulfate should not be given because, and also magnesium sulfate should never be given with nifedipine because severe hypotension can occur. Okay, so this is one of the contraindications. Okay, these 2 drugs should not be given.
And second, ma'am, the tocolysis role in pre-prom, because in GTG it's clearly say there is it's not to be given, but
Yeah,
some books answer that the tocolysis
no,
need to be given because while patient is waiting for steroid cover.
No, you need not, because you have to go with the latest GTG, so it's not recommended.
Okay, ma'am. So no tocolysis despite that the steroid cover has not been full completed. Will not give
No.
if the membrane already ruptured.
No, if the GTG says that we are not giving, so we can't, like, it's the latest thing.
GTG is not clear. It's just only on a paragraph. It is written. There is a box in which it is written that in P-PROM that the tocolysis is contraindicated. Then below that it is written that it increases the chances of chorioamnitis and there is no neonatal benefit. But it is not clear because the role of tocolysis in preterm is only that to cover the steroids. Basically, the main purpose is to increase the steroid.
We are giving in preterm also we are giving only for that duration where we want to cover the steroid coverage or we want to transfer the patient. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
In that case also we are giving only for that duration. We are not giving prolonged tocolysis in that preterm.
So, ma'am, if the patient is having a pre-prom and she has not received the steroid cover, so do we give that or not to give? So that is not clear.
says not to give.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Any doubts? Someone was asking about GBS.
Yes, ma'am. That is also one of the query, that 6 centimeter dilated patient who has been tested GBS positive in previous pregnancy. Baby is not affected. She's only a carrier, but she has not undergone any test recently. So what to do? Whether to give IAP or not to give IAP? If
Yeah,
she
it's again a
directly
phase.
given labor.
But I think if she has been tested with GBS positive, even in the previous pregnancy, we should go for IAP, I suppose.
So actually that is also because, ma'am, the guidelines say that the risk is 50%. If she gets, if the test has
Yeah,
been done, then it reduces the risk to 1:500. Means if it is
yeah,
positive, then chance is 100 for 400. And
yeah.
but if she's negative, then chance is 1:5,000. So offer the
Because,
test. But
yeah,
this patient came
but
directly
she
in
has
the
already
labor.
gone now.
So what to
Yeah,
do?
yeah, before 37 weeks. So I think we should give her IAP.
Okay, ma'am. So we mark offer high because, ma'am, this question is in Conje. This question is in the three different books, and
Yeah,
all the
I
three
know.
books are giving different answer. That's a
Yeah,
problem,
I
ma'am.
know.
The one is saying don't offer, one is saying offer. So
I
it's
think
another.
whenever there is any doubt for GBS, you should go for IAP.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And one more doubt, ma'am. This one, this GBS patient. But what the broad spectrum antibiotic do we give, or directly IAP if the patient has a pyrexia? Actually, it's written
I
only
think no,
offer
with
broad spectrum
pyrexia, they are
antibiotic.
always going for broad spectrum antibiotic because that covers
And
the GBS also.
And induction also, ma'am, this question also has a different answer in Andrew Sizer as well as in the different book, that if the patient of term basically presented and previous GBS affected, so we offer induction and IAP immediately. Then the another option is induction, immediate induction now, and offer IAP once the active labor start. So this also question, ma'am, the varies in Andrew Sizer as well as in the other books. So
I
one
think the
guideline.
IAP should always be offered once the active labor starts.
So we will mark that option, ma'am. We'll not mark
Because the
together that.
last dose of penicillin should be at least 4 hours before the delivery. No, this is what they say.
Yes, ma'am.
So
So
we
we.
can start then. So once when the patient starts going into active labor, I think we can start then.
So
Unless
we
and until
mark
she
that
goes into
option then.
Yeah,
We do not
I think
give
so.
immediately both. So that is also, ma'am, not a very confusion fact in the books, which is the answer
Because
is
it
varying.
might yeah. Because unless and until she goes into precipitate labor, then it will be a different thing. Otherwise, we will have enough time after she goes into active labor. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
Hmm.
ma'am.
Okay. Anything else? Hope
Anything
you have liked
else?
this.
Hope you have liked this.
Hello, Dr. Gitika, and hello, students. So, in exam, what I would like to say is in exam, the questions will be very clear and it will be targeted, which will make you choose only one definitive answer, dears. Okay, so there won't be a gray zone in your exams. These could be the recalls which are memory based, so minute facts may be missing. So just go by the guidelines. Make sure you're thorough with the guidelines and you know your concepts well and they are clear. And in the exams, they will give you 1 or 2 hints, which will definitely make you choose the single best answer. Okay, nothing to worry on that. So just concentrate on making your concepts very much clear. Okay. And it was a wonderful session, Dr. Geetika. Many
Yeah.
of the students are benefited by this, and I know that the slides, presentations, everything, it was really excellent. Thank you so much. So any doubts that you have regarding this marathon course, you can get back to me. You can message me personally. So I'll be giving you the further details regarding that. And a few more courses will be announced. One will be for the September batch. The other one will be for the Jan batch. So do keep looking for the free groups for all the updates, dear. Thank you so much, Dr. Geetika. You have anything to say?
No, and it was
No,
very nice
and
to
it was
have you
very
all.
nice to have you all.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much. So we'll carry on with the free sessions in the upcoming days, and all the best, dears. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, bye. Good night.
Okay, bye.
This conference will now be recorded.